Good evening, everyone. My name is Liudmyla. I am from Ukraine. And to be honest, recent time I'm so proud that I'm Ukrainian, and I worry a bit because it's my first talk. So today's my topic is Ukraine. It's a brief history about my country. So the first, I'd like to talk about geography of Ukraine, where it is situated. So Ukraine situated on the southeastern part of Europe, and you can see that it borders with many countries, with Russia, Belarus on the north, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova on the west. And we have two beautiful seas, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So you can see that Sumy region is on the north, and I live exactly there, very close to our neighbors, unfortunately. The territory, the area of my country include different landscape. You can see there are mountains such as Carpathian Mountains or Crimean Mountains. Also, you can see steppes. The main river of Ukraine is the Dnipro River, and it divides Ukraine exactly into two halves, the West Ukraine as it was before, and the East Ukraine, the east of Ukraine. So, history of Ukraine. Different parts of Ukraine were invaded and occupied in the first millennium BC by Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians. I tried to find pictures of them because it was very difficult, and it's very early history. And in the first, I'm sorry, I can't see my, and in the first, you can read it, in the first millennium AD, it was invaded by different tribes, Huns, Goths, Khazars, and etc. Slavic tribes settled there after the 4th century. Kiev was a chief city. Kievan Rus was founded and began its development. According to the different sources, Slavic lands would become Kievan Rus was Prince Oleg. He united Slavic lands, and he extended his control from Novgorod south along the Dnieper River Valley to protect trade from Khazar incursions from the east, and took control of the city of Kiev. I found a map of the Kievan Rus in the 11th century. You can see that our current border of Ukraine is here, and the Kievan Rus was spread much far away. This territory was covered by Kievan Rus. It is a picture of the Prince Oleg. Another prince of Kievan Rus was Sviatoslav I. He achieved the first major territorial expansion of the state, fighting a war of conquest against the Khazars. Why I decided to mention him? Because he was an extraordinary prince. He lived with his soldiers. He did not use his noble status as usually it used to be with other princes. Volodymyr the Great was one of the prominent princes of Kievan Rus because he spread Christianity with his own baptism and extended it to all inhabitants of Kiev and beyond. You could see the coins of that period. On the one side of the coin, you can see a trident. It is a national coat of arms of Ukraine nowadays, as you know. And another side was with his portrait, which is written Vladimir the Great. He was really great. Kievan Rus reached the greatest development during the rule of the Yaroslav the Wise. his sons assembled and issued its first written legal code, the Ruska Pravda, shortly after his death. I mentioned him also because he is also called as the father of law of Europe, because his daughters married to kings, European kings, such as Elizabeth married to Harold, who attained her hand by his military exploits in the Byzantine Empire. Anastasia got married to Andrew I of Hungary. Anna married Henry I of France and was the regent of France during their son's minority. She was the most beloved daughter of Yaroslav the Wise. And the fourth daughter, possibly Agatha, wife of Edward, the exile of the royal family of England, the mother of Edgar and Saint Margaret of Scotland. But there is a sign of question. Is it true? Who knows? So the next slide. Ukraine. As Ukraine was mentioned for the first time in the tale of Ihor campaign against Polotsk in 1185. I'd like to say that unfortunately he was defeated in this battle and he came home without his victory. The Mongol Empire, it is a parallel with nowadays. So the Mongol Empire invaded and conquered Kievan Rus in the mid-13th century, destroying numerous cities, including the largest, such as Kiev, 50,000 inhabitants, and Chernihiv, 30,000 inhabitants, with the only major cities escaping destruction being Novgorod and Pskov, located on the north. By the middle of the 14th century, Ukraine were under the rule of three external powers: the Golden Horde, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the Kingdom of Poland. You can see I tried to find maps of this territory. And let's start. The Cossacks of Ukraine. It is the third period of the history of Ukraine. So in the 15th century, a new martial society, the Cossacks, from the Turkic Kazakh meaning adventurer or free man, was beginning to evolve in Ukraine's southern steppe frontier. The term was applied initially to venturesome men who entered the steppe seasonally for hunting, fishing, and the gathering of honey. The numbers were continually augmented by peasants fleeing serfdom and adventurers from other social strata, including the nobility. Banding together for mutual protection, the Cossacks by the mid-16th century had developed a military organization of a peculiarly democratic kind, with a general assembly, Rada, as the supreme authority, and elected officers, including the commander-in-chief or hetman. Their center was the Sich, an armed camp in the land of the Lower Dnieper beyond the rapids. Zaporizhia in Ukrainian it's called, Zaporizhia. Zaporozhia, in contemporary usage, Zaporizhia, which is usually shelled by Russians nowadays, unfortunately. The Cossacks defended Ukraine's frontier population from Tatar incursions, conducted their own campaigns into Crimean territory, and in the flotillas of light craft, even raided Turkish coastal cities in Anatolia. The Polish government found the Cossacks a useful fighting force in wars with the Tatars, Turks, and Muscovites, but in peacetime viewed them as a dangerously volatile element. Attempts to control them institutionally and to limit their number through an official register created serious disconnect among the Cossacks, who increasingly perceived themselves as forming a distinct state with inherent rights and liberties. Sporadically, over a half-century starting in 1591, the Cossacks rose up in revolts that were put down only with great difficulty. In the first half of the 17th century, the Cossacks also became involved in the raging religious conflict. In 1620, the entire Zaporizhian host joined the Kievan Orthodox Brotherhood. In the same year, a new Orthodox hierarchy was concentrated in Kiev under their military protection. Thus, in the great religious divide, the Cossacks became identified with staunch support of orthodoxy and uncompromising opposition to the Uniate Church, under the protection afforded by the Cossacks and the dynamic leadership of a few metropolitan of Kiev, Peter Mohyla, Ukrainian Petro Mohyla, Orthodoxy flourished in Ukraine. It became the driving force behind a cultural revival and included the establishment of the Kievan Mohyla Academy, the first Ukrainian institution of higher learning. Hetmanate and hetman. It was equivalent to a head of state or a monarch. He was a head of Zaporizhian Sich, and you can see on these pictures almost all the hetmans of Ukraine of that time. But I decided to mention a few of them because there are a lot of information about them. So the first who I decided to mention is Philip Orlik. Philip Orlik, you can see him on the picture. He is the author of the first constitution of Ukraine in the history of Ukraine, and I think that in the history of Europe as well. Bohdan Khmelnytsky. I decided to mention him because he played the leading role in Ukraine-Russia relationship. So Khmelnytsky was a petty nobleman and Cossack officer who, unable to obtain justice for wrongs suffered at Polish hands, fled to the Sich in late 1647 and was soon elected hetman. In early 1648, he began preparations for an insurrection, securing for the purpose Tatar military support. A Polish army sent into Ukraine to forestall the rebellion, which was shattered in 2 battles in May. This victory gave signal to a massive popular uprising. Violence spread throughout Ukraine as Cossacks and peasants vented their fury on those they associated with Polish tyranny and social oppression: landlords, officials, Latin and Uniate clergy and Jews. The Poles in turn took bloody reprisals against the rebellious population. In September, Khmelnytsky inflicted another crushing defeat on a newly raised Polish army, marched westward through Galicia, and finally besieged Zamość in Poland proper. He did not press his advantage, however, and with the election of a new Polish king in November, he returned to central Ukraine. In January 1649, Khmelnytsky entered Kiev to triumphal acclaim as liberator. Also initially seeking only a redress of grievances from the Polish crown, Khmelnytsky, following his arrival in Kiev, began to conceive of Ukraine as independent Cossack state. He set about establishing a system of government and state finances, created a local administration under a new governing elite drawn from the Cossack officers, and initiated relations with foreign states. Still prepared to recognize royal sovereignty, however, he entered into negotiations with the Poles. But neither the Treaty of Zborov, August 1649, nor a less favorable agreement 2 years later proved acceptable either to the nobility or to the Cossack rank and file and the radicalized masses on the Ukrainian side. While military operations continued inconclusively, and because Tatar support proved undependable at crucial moments, Khmelnytsky began to search for other allies. In 1654, At Pereyaslav, he concluded with Moscow an agreement whose precise nature has generated enormous controversy. Russian historians have emphasized Ukraine's acceptance of the Tsar's suzerainty, which subsequently legitimized Russian rule. But Ukrainian historiography has stressed Moscow's recognition of Ukraine's autonomy, including an elective hetmancy, self-government, and the right to conduct foreign relations. That was virtually tantamount to tantamount to independence, according to Pereyaslav agreement. Moscow now entered the war against Poland. No decisive breakthrough occurred, however, despite occasional joint victories, and Khmelnytsky became increasingly disillusioned with the Muscovite alliance. There were disputes over control of conquered territory in Belarus and conflicts over Russian interference in internal Ukrainian affairs. Especially galling to the hetman was the Russo-Polish rapprochement that followed the invasion in 1655 of Poland by Sweden. Moscow's adversary, but Ukraine's potential ally, Khmelnytsky again cast about for new alliances and coalitions involving Sweden, Transylvania, Brandenburg, Moldavia, and Wallachia, and there were indications that the hetman planned to sever the Muscovite connection, but died before he could do so. The hetman state reached its zenith in the hetmancy of Ivan Mazepa. You can see his picture on this slide. Relying at first on the support of Tsar Peter the Great, Mazepa exercised neo-monarchical powers in the hetmanate. Literature, art, and architecture in the distinctive Cossack Baroque style flourished under his patronage, and the Kievan-Mohyla Academy experienced its golden age. Mazepa aspired to annex the right bank and recreate a united Ukrainian state, initially still under the Tsar's sovereignty. But Peter's centralizing reforms and the exaction imposed on the hetmanate in connection with the Second Northern War appeared to threaten Ukrainian autonomy. In 1708, in furtherance of his plans for independence, Mazepa made a secret alliance with Charles XII of Sweden, but in the decisive Battle of Poltava, their allied forces were defeated. Mazepa fled to Moldavia, where he died shortly thereafter. Also, Peter allowed the election of a successor to Mazepa. The hetmanate autonomous prerogatives were severely curtailed and underwent further weakening over the remaining decades of the 18th century. From 1722 to 1727, and again from 1734 to 1750, the office of hetman was in abeyance as the Russian imperial regime introduced new institutions to oversee the country's governance. In 1750, Empress Elizabeth revived the hetmancy for Cyril Razumovsky, the brother of her favorite. On the accession of Catherine the Great in 1762, the hetman and the starshina petitioned for the restoration of the hetmanate's previous status. Instead, in 1764, Catherine forced Razumovsky's resignation. Over the next 20 years, all vestiges of Ukrainian autonomy were eliminated, and in 1775, the Zaporizhian Sich, the bastion of the Cossacks, was destroyed by Russian troops. To the east of the hetmanate lay lands that until the 17th century had remained largely unpopulated, part of the wild fields since the Mongol invasion. Into this area, starting in the late 16th century, the Muscovite government gradually extended its line of fortifications against the Tatars. In the 17th century, this territory became an area of colonization, but Ukrainian peasants and Cossacks fleeing Polish rule and later the ravages of the Russian period. The newcomers established free, non-serf settlements called slobodas that gave the area the name of Sloboda, Ukraine. Kharkiv developed into the region's main center. Like the hetmanates, Sloboda, Ukraine enjoyed extensive internal autonomy, so under officials appointed by the Russian imperial government to autonomy of Sloboda, Ukraine was abolished under Catherine the Great in 1765. Now you can see the map. What territory was under the rule of Russian Empire? Ukrainians lived in two large land-based empires. Ukraine was divided into two parts. The eastern part was under the rule of the Russian Empire, and the western part was under the rule of Austro-Hungarian Empire. During the reign of Alexander I, the Russian presence in Ukraine consisted primarily of the imperial army and bureaucracy. By the 1830s, during the reign of Nicholas I, the process of establishing a centralized administration throughout Ukraine was completed. The abolition of Magdeburg in 1831 and the Lithuanian statute in 1840 put an end to non-Russian legal influences, elected officials, and municipal self-government in Ukraine. Even the name Ukraine almost disappeared from usage. Left bank Ukraine was generally referred to as Little Russia, while right bank Ukraine was officially called the Southwestern Land. Among the Ukrainian elite, especially the descendants of the old Cossack Starshina, a Little Russian mentality, a tendency to view Ukraine as a distinct but organic part of the Russian Empire, became widespread. Also, the impact of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic invasion in 1812 was minimal in Ukraine. Secret societies nonetheless arose there as part of the Decembrist movement. Its members attempted unsuccessfully to stage the First Revolution, 1825, in the Russian Empire. In 1830, the Polish nobles in right bank Ukraine joined the anti-Russian rebellion that began in the Congress Kingdom of Poland. After suppressing it in 1831, the Tsarist government instituted Russification policies on the right bank, harshly implemented by Governor General Dmitry Bibikov. You can see him on my slide. They had a major impact on both the Ukrainians and Poles. They curtailed the influence of the Polish nobles in society and local government. The estates of about 3,000 nobles were confiscated, and some 340,000 were deprived of their status and deported to the east. The counter-Polish influence in culture and education on the right bank. The Kremenets Lyceum was closed down and the Russian University was opened in Kiev in 1834. It is now Kiev University. In 1839, the numerous uniates in the region were forced to adopt orthodoxy. To win over the Ukrainian peasantry and further alienate them from the Polish nobles, in 1847, Bibikov introduced inventory regulations limiting the obligations a peasant owed his landlord. According to this reform by Bibikov, Ukrainian peasants did not have enough land to survive. Also, they had to go to serf, and they were tied down to their masters. They were private serfs. Austro-Hungarian Empire. The vast majority of the approximately 2.4 million Western Ukrainians in the Habsburg Empire in the early 19th century lived in eastern Galicia. The remainder lived in Bukovina and Transcarpathia. Their social structure was relatively simple, for the population in eastern Galicia consisted mostly of impoverished peasantry, 95%, and about 2,000 priestly families. The nobles in Galicia were almost all Poles or Polonite Ukrainians, and Jews made up the overwhelming majority of the small urban population. The socio-economic development of Western Ukraine lagged behind that of Russian-ruled Ukraine. It was one of the poorest regions in all Europe. Galicia was incorporated into the Habsburg Empire during a time of major changes, and Emperor Joseph II developed a special interest in Galicia, viewing it as a kind of laboratory for his educational, social, and economic reforms. Most notable in this respect was the transformation of the clergy into a civil service, the limitation of covey labor, the regulation of feudal units, and the abolition of the personal dependence of peasants on the seigneur. After Joseph's death, 1790, many of his reforms, especially those pertaining to the peasants, were either subverted by the nobles or rescinded by his conservative successors. After the 18th century partitions of Poland, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the territory was split between the Habsburg monarchy and the Russian Empire. The modern southwestern part of Western Ukraine became the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria after 1804 crown land of the Austrian Empire. Its northern flank, with the cities of Lutsk and Rivne, was acquired in 1795 by Imperial Russia following the third and final partition of Poland. Throughout its existence, Russian Poland was marred with violence and intimidation, beginning with the 1794 massacres, imperial land theft, and the deportations of the November and January uprisings. By contrast, the Austrian partition, with its same of the land in the cities of Lviv and Stanislavov, currently it is Ivano-Frankivsk, was freer politically, perhaps because it had a lot less to offer economically. In Ukraine, as elsewhere in Eastern Europe, the rise of national consciousness was primarily associated with the impact of Western ideas and with the birth of an intelligentsia. The institution of higher learning established to provide the imperial governments with well-trained bureaucrats facilitated the development of the intelligentsia. Kharkiv University served as the intellectual center of Russian-ruled Ukraine until Kyiv University assumed this role in the 1830s. Initially, the Ukrainian intelligentsia under Russia consisted primarily of nobles by background. A small minority were priests' sons, burghers, or Cossacks. Indicative of the first phase of nation building was the interest shown by the intelligentsia in the late 18th and early 19th century in Ukrainian history, historiography, ethnography, and folklore. Given the central importance of the native language in the maintenance of national consciousness, the Ukrainian intelligentsia was anxious to raise its status. A significant event in this regard was the publication in 1798 of Ivan Kotlarevsky's Aeneid. Despite their achievements in literature and scholarship, the Ukrainian intelligentsia of the early 19th century continued to view Ukraine and the Ukrainians in regionalist terms, convinced that in cultivating things Ukrainian, it was also enriching the cultural heritage of Russia as a whole. You can see Ivan Kotlarevsky himself. His publishing, you can see the year 1798, and the museum complex in Ukraine. It is the building, the house in Ukraine, and it is called Chata, where Ivan Kotlяревsky used to live. In the 1840s, a new generation of Ukrainian intellectuals, now based in Kiev, emerged. Among its leaders was the historian Mykola Kostomarov. You can see the first picture. The author Panteleimon Kulish, it is the picture on the right. And the most important, the poet Taras Shevchenko, whose works have external and unparalleled influence on Ukrainians. His picture is in the middle. In 1847, they, together with a small group of other Ukrainian intellectuals, began the political phase of nation building by founding in Kiev the secret Cyril and Methodius Brotherhood, which was quickly uncovered by the Tsarist police. The trials and exile of its leaders marked the beginning of the long confrontation between the Ukrainian intelligentsia, which stood for national rights and social justice, and the Russian imperial authorities. In Austrian-ruled Western Ukraine in the early 19th century, the intelligentsia was practically synonymous with the Greek Catholic clergy, the only social group that could avail itself of higher learning. Thus, of the 43 Ukrainian language books that appeared there between 1837 and 1850, 40 were written by priests. The first signs of interest in the native language appeared in Peremysh, where in 1816 Ivan Khmelnytsky organized a clerical society for the purpose of disseminating culture and enlightenment and preparing simple religious texts. In the 1830s, the center of nation building activity shifted to Lviv, where young, idealistic seminarians captivated by romantic national ideas came to the fore. Nationhood became a major political issue in Western Ukraine during the revolution of 1848-1849 in the Habsburg monarchy, which shook the Habsburg Empire and much of Europe. Confronted by uprising in Hungary, Italy, and Vienna itself, and threatened by a Polish revolt in Galicia, the Habsburgs sought to gain popular support by abolishing serfdom and establishing parliamentary representation. These developments provided the impetus for political self-organization of Ukrainians. Rejecting the claims of the Poles to represent the entire population of Galicia, the Ukrainians established the Supreme Ruthenian Council as their representative body and clashed with the Poles at the Slavic Congress in Prague, 1848. Thus began a long period of Polish-Ukrainian political conflicts in Galicia. Demanding autonomy, the Ukrainians established the first Ukrainian language newspaper, Zorya Halitska, you can see it on my slide, and the popular enlightenment and publishing society Halitsko Ruska Matitsa. Pressured the Habsburgs to establish a chair of Ukrainian philology at Lviv University, began the construction of the People's Home in Lviv. Formed pro-Habsburg militias and established contacts with compatriots in Bukovina and Transcarpathia. Thus, the revolutionary climate in 1848 allowed the Western Ukrainians to express and organize themselves as a distinct nation for the first time in modern history. As I mentioned, Ivan Kotlяревsky, in 1898, Congress of Ukrainian Writers, they gathered to celebrate the 100th anniversary of publishing Aeneida as the start of Ukrainian language, because Aeneida was as a pattern of Ukrainian language, how it should sound. Okay. Russia's defeat in the Crimean War in 1853-1856 brought to the fore the empire's socio-economic backwardness and impelled Alexander II to introduce major reforms. The most important of these was the abolition of serfdom in 1861. The impact of this emancipation on the Ukrainians was especially great because 42% of them had been private serfs. Other reforms introduced by Alexander in the 1860s included the sale of land to state peasants, the introduction of local organs of self-government, zemstvos, to look after education, public health, the mail and roads, expanded accessibility to higher education, and the modernization of the court system. The Russophiles' tendency to identify with the Tsar and the Russian people and culture was opposed by Ukrainophile students, younger clergy, and members of the rising secular intelligentsia. Using Taras Shevchenko and the Ukrainophiles in Russian-ruled Ukraine as well as the Ruthenian triad as the models, the Galician populists championed the use of the vernacular, sought closer ties with the Ukrainian peasantry and its culture, and stressed the national distinctiveness of the Ukrainians. By the 1880s, however, a small group of young intelligentsia led by Ivan Franko and Mikhailo Pavlik concluded that neither the populists nor the Russophiles addressed adequately the present social economic needs of the West Ukrainian peasantry. Greatly influenced by Mikhailo Drahomanov, they adopted a program that combined socialism with Ukrainian national demands, and in 1890 they formed the Ukrainian Radical Party. Despite their political disadvantage vis-à-vis the Poles, Galicia's Ukrainians lived in a constitutional monarchy that allowed much greater freedom of association and expression that was possible in the Russian Empire. This freedom, as well as examples set by the Czechs, Germans, and Poles, led to an upsurge of organizational activity in Western Ukraine in the late 19th and early 20th century. A harbinger of this tendency was the Prosvita Society founded by the populists in 1868 to spread literacy among the peasants. With the arrival, Chlopomani, you can see it on my slide, Chlopomani, or Ukrainophiles. You can see Khoinovsky, Vasilevsky, Venarsky, and Sitin-Rilsky, and Antonovich. With the arrival in 1894 of Mikhailo Hrushevsky from Kyiv to occupy the chair of history at Lviv University, a new era of Ukrainian scholarship began. And under his direction, in 1893, the Shevchenko Society was transformed into the Shevchenko Scientific Society, a de facto Academy of Sciences. As various ideologies crystallized, the organization infrastructure grew, and the need to function effectively in a parliamentary system became more pressing. The West Ukrainians formed political parties, notably the above-mentioned Ukrainian Radical Party, the Populist Independentist National Democratic Party, the Marxist Ukrainian Social Democratic Party, and the Catholic Ruthenian People's Union. As a result of the widespread educational, religious, civic, cultural, literary, and economic activity, Galicia became the bastion of the Ukrainian national movement. The Poles' increased efforts to limit it led to a rapid escalation of hostilities between the two communities, reflected in the fierce clash between Ukrainian and Polish students at Lviv University and the assassination in 1908 of vice-gerent Andrzej Pototsky by the Ukrainian student Miroslav Sichinsky. Ukrainians succeeded in establishment an effective educational system and gaining significant representations in the Venice parliament. By contrast, the 500,000 Ukrainians in Hungarian-dominated Transcarpathia had great difficulty in establishing their national identity because the intense megarization policies of the government and strong Russophile tendencies among the tiny intelligentsia. The impact of the First World War on the Ukrainians, who were caught between major adversaries in the conflict, was immediate and devastating. About 3 million of them fought in Russia's armies and over 250,000 served in Austria's forces. Some of the biggest battles on the Eastern Front occurred in Galicia, and much of Western Ukraine suffered terribly from repeated offensives and occupations. On the eve of the war, the West Ukrainians declared their loyalty to the Habsburg dynasty. When war broke out, they formed an umbrella organization, the Supreme Ukrainian Council in Lviv, and organized a 2,500-man volunteer legion, the Ukrainian Sich Riflemen, the first Ukrainian military unit in modern times. In 1915, they created a coordinated body in Vienna, the General Ukrainian Council, consisting of 21 Galician and 7 Bukovinian representatives and 3 members of the Union for the Liberation of Ukraine. The rebirth of Ukrainian statehood by the third year of the First World War, the multinational Russian Empire, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman Empire all showed signs of internal weakness and disintegration. In the Russian Empire, military defeats, disorganization, inflation, and serious food shortage provoke mass social disconnect and unrest, which culminated in the February Revolution of 1917 and the collapse of the monarchy following the abdication of Nicholas II on the 15th of March 1917. Most of the opposition parties in the State Duma banded together to form the Russian Provisional Government. The Bolsheviks, however, who came to dominate the Soviets of workers and soldiers deputies in Petrograd and elsewhere, refused to participate in the government in this situation of social and economic chaos and dual political authority. The provisional government found it impossible to maintain control. You can see a picture on my slide. I think that this picture was very important in my decision to speak up about Ukraine. I showed it to Michael, and he liked it, and he said, why not to speak up? So I decided, okay, so this is a postcard of Ukraine, which is tied to the cross. She is Ukrainian in the traditional Ukrainian clothes. Children nearby, they try to release her, to free her. And crows above her symbolize empires who decided to divide Ukraine and to use her resources. On the background, you can see that our religion, our churches, our daily life, our traditions and customs are on fire. I promised not to mention current situation. Okay. And let's talk about not so hard situation. I decided to stop just before the 20th century. Why? Because the 20th century has plenty other events and situations, and I think that 20th century requires another full presentation, because again, Ukraine survived 2 revolutions and 3 holodomors, starvations, 2 world wars, Chernobyl, and nowadays we survive current war. So I decided to stop there and to focus our attention on another side of Ukrainian life. So let's talk about our culture. So this is how Ukrainian building house looked. You can see a lot of different things. And Ukrainian, they are agrarians. And you can see a bunch of wheat, embroidered towels. It is our national tradition to embroider different clothes and towels. In the corner, it was obligatory to have icons of our saints and God. Ukrainians believed that Saint Nicholas can help and solve all our problems. I hope that it will be the truth. Our literature. I chose just a few our writers of the 19th century. There are a lot of them, but I decided just a few of them. So Taras Grigorovich Shevchenko, I think that you heard about him, and you know that about 1,200 monuments around the world are devoted to this poet. And you know that everyone should have a Bible. Every Ukrainian should have Kobzar, his Kobzar, and with his poems about Ukraine, about Ukrainian freedom, about Ukrainian language, about Ukrainian nature and struggle for freedom. Unfortunately, you can see the date, the year of his death. He died 1861, exactly when Nicholas II decided to free our peasants, servants, and to allow them to buy some land. Unfortunately, not all the peasants could afford it. Markovchuk, it was a prominent writer. Ivan Levitsky and his Kaidash family, about it described the different social life of Ukrainian people. And Ivan Franko, a great interpreter and translator who knew a lot of languages, who could write, and he was the most productive writer. And here's one of his famous writings, Zahar Berkut, on this slide. Another slide is devoted to Ukrainian cloth, embroidered shirts, embroidered towels, beautiful people who knew, who have even alphabet, which can be embroidered in different symbols. I even found out how to embroider my name, but I forgot it, surely. So beautiful people. You can see old pictures that not only just now we decided to wear sharovars and embroidered clothes. Beautiful ladies could notice different beautiful jewelries on our women's necks, necklaces, earrings, flowers. It was, and it still is, quite colorful. And another, dear man, I know that you like it even more than women. So Ukrainian traditional cuisine, it is very tasty. And I think that everyone can even like something for himself or herself. So surely the king of our table, of our cuisine, is borscht. It is the red soup, beetroot soup. It is cooked deliciously, okay? And I think that there is no Ukrainian who does not know how to cook it. And it is usually eaten with pampushkas, with garlic. You can see on the left corner vareniki. It is stuffed, it can be stuffed with salt filling or a sweet filling, no matter. it's tasty, whatever is there inside of it. You know, that inner world of varenik is very interesting and tasty. The same like pancakes. Holubtsi, it's cabbage rolls with meat and rice. You can see on the right corner, paskas and painted eggs. You know that Easter is coming to us next week, and we bake such Easter breads like paskas, and we color eggs in different colors because there is a legend that Jesus Christ, when he was a little boy, he played with colored eggs. So we color it, but then surely we eat them because nobody wants to play it. Okay, and the last symbol of Ukrainian cuisine is pork. Pork is usually eaten with garlic, with onion, with mustard, with pickles, everything you like, and surely it must be on the black bread. So who is hungry? I'm sorry. So the next slide. Lorraine, I'm sorry. Okay. So the next musical instrument of Ukraine, it is a great variety of it. Ukrainian musical is very beautiful. Unfortunately, I didn't prepare any piece of it, unfortunately, but maybe later. So the first instrument is called bandura. You can see there are a lot of strings. I forgot the number because it is a number and I'm a humanitarian. I always forget numbers. The trombeta, it is a middle, it's a long, a big instrument. It is used by shepherds in Carpathian mountains. They call their sheep to their places. And it sounds really loudly. I heard once and I say that it's really impressive. Kobza. I decided to put two pictures, the man who plays Kobza and another picture below it, Kobzar, who plays Kobza, and a young little boy. Historically, Kobzars were blind, and they were old Cossacks or peasants, and they sang songs about heroic past of Ukraine, Cossacks and battles and hetmans, and as blind man is hardly to walk, so they had someone to help them. So there was always a young boy who led them anywhere they needed to go. The next instrument is lira, is called lira. You can see in the middle of my slide. Then you can see cymbals. It's kind of like a xylophone, but it's not like that. And sopilka. Maybe you've seen Eurovision 2022 and our group, they sang Stefania, and one of the musicians played sopilka there. And they won the first place. I'm so proud of them. Yes, I am. And now I'd like you just to watch a short video about my Ukraine. This video was shot before the war, before the COVID, and it was, I found it on YouTube and I liked it, and I thought that you'd enjoy watching it. So thank you. That was my presentation. I'm coming back to you. I'm here.